Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our next little section of Unit 9. And this one, we're going to talk about conformity and obedience. So write that at the top. And then you'll see my notes are a little bit all over the place, but that's okay. I just moved some stuff around as I was reviewing the notes. All right, so we're going to start because you guys know that you love these long little videos. So I'm gonna try to talk as quickly as I possibly can. All right. Anyway, so first thing I want you to do is your first subtopic is actually going to be on conformity. So write that there. And then just so you guys know, conforming, which is, like we conform, it's kind of we are just complying with usually when we're talking about conformity here is conforming to like the social group, okay? So just think of conforming is that you are just complying with whatever's going on around you, okay? But that's not the definition I want you to write down. I just want you, when you see that word conformity for this class, that you're thinking of, oh, we're gonna just follow along or comply with them, okay? So conformity is when it's adjusting our behaviors or our thinking towards the group standard. Okay, so conformity typically, um, we're gonna either adjust the way that we behave or the way we think based on the group standards. So this is why, for example, if you're in a class that they're like really studious students, usually, AP classrooms, um, typically students in that class will conform for the group standards of usually it's very dedicated students, tends to be a little bit more overachieving, trying to get those things. That's why it's always good to be in, those classrooms that people take academics a little bit more serious. Okay, so under conformity, that was your first little bullet. Then I want you to, under conformity, continue writing. Next little bullet is going to be, we tend to, so people, just everybody in general, tends to adopt their behaviors or their attitudes and beliefs, okay, of the kind of like the norm of that group, okay? So for instance, if you have a group that's that their attitude tends to be more of like, yeah, school is important and we need to study and we need to do well, right? We tend to, when we're around those people, we tend to also, kind of adopt to that social group's thinking. And then if it's more like, whatever, who cares? School is not that important, blah, 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 then you will tend to base this, like conform to that groups. This is why this happens when we're in different social groups that we have that we talked about. This is one of the reasons why we tend to shift a little bit in the way that we behave, because if it's we just kind of conform to the group. So if you're in a group, like maybe you're super talkative, like it happens to me if I'm in a setting that people are very quiet or more reserved, then I tend to, it's like kind of reading the room. I tend to conform to that group standards, okay? So sometimes that happens, sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes you're like, oh, I'm not gonna just be quiet, like maybe they just need a different vibe. And we'll talk about that in the classroom as well. But that's basically conformity. And before you do not write normative social influence, because what I want you to do is the next little subtopic is why do we conform? Okay, so that would be like the topic of the why do we conform? And the main two reasons why we conform have to do with this, the normative social influence, right, which I have here, and then the informational social influence. So these are the things that it's like, it's part of what kind of makes us conform, okay? And so the first thing is going to be the normative social group. So this is one of those words that College Board loves to use. And I always tell my students, just break it down into like the words, right? So Normative is like, just think of the norm, like the social norm. And then we have social, which is group. So it's like the norm of the group that's going to influence, right? So this has more to do with like social norms influencing us to conform because we want to belong to the group. We don't want to be an outsider. So this is important. So we will conform to the social norm because we want to be part of the group. Okay, we want to be socially accepted. And this happens with everybody. Okay, so under normative social influence, I want you to put that the behavior is influenced by the social norms because we want, and so either you could start a new bullet or continue that. It's because we want to gain approval or avoid disapproval from the group. Okay. So this is typically why we will go with like the flow of the group because we want to be able to belong. Now, if the social group is not one you care to, you'll be less likely to conform, right? It kind of makes sense. But this is with everybody. So it's very interesting because now you'll get to see like when people are in a group, which is two or more people, like them and somebody else, you get to see how people like, start shifting or changing because of this kind of like phenomenon that we all go through. Okay? And this is a perfect example. Somebody from an evolutionary perspective would look at the normative social influence of that it fits perfectly into evolutionary because we are pack animals and we want to belong because we need each other for survival, right? Which is quite interesting because we also are a society that pushes away from asking for help from one another or kind of depending on others. So, something we could also talk about in class, okay? And then the second reason why we tend to conform is for what's called the informational social influence. So, this is when we're working in a group and we're writing this down. So this is when we're in a group and they give you information to solve the problems. Um, and we tend to go with that as long as it's a group that we assume to be right. Okay? Or that we excuse me, like we trust what they say. Okay, so informational social is when we're given information, right, from our group that then that's what's going to influence our behavior. So informational info from the group that's going to influence. Now, the key with this one is that the group or the social group has to be one that you tend to believe that they are correct. So, for instance, perfect example is like teachers or your parents or your best friends or, somebody, professor, somebody that you admire. Um, and it could be anybody, Taylor Swift. It could be any of these musicians, actors that if they say something and we believe it, or they're wearing something that we like, and that is what's going to influence us. So another great example, and I just thought of it, is like when we're watching like those little on TikTok or on Instagram that you got those influencers that they're like, oh, look at this cream and this and that, and oh my, look at my whatever, get ready with me in the morning and my creams. If you trust that person or believe that they know what they're talking about, you're more than likely to also continue that behavior as well, so that they will influence you. So it's quite interesting how we kind of like just conform and say like, yeah, oh, she wears this cream, I'm gonna wear it too. So keep that in mind as you're going through your little TikTok and the Instagram, because those are things that we tend to conform with. Okay, and take a little pause here. All right, so now we're gonna go to the next section of which is automatic mimicry, which is basically automatic, like we automatically mimic somebody else, we copy them. And this is where you will see the mirror neurons play an influence in this. And what is automatic mimicry is that humans tend to go and copy their group without even realizing they're doing this. So, for example, laughing, yawning, coughing, or checking your phone, right? Like I was the other day, I was somewhere, I was at a holiday party, and then everybody was kind of talking, and then all of a sudden, one person, like it got quiet, one person checked their phone, and then it was like, toot, 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 everybody started checking their phone. So it was quite interesting. So we naturally do this, and I think it could be, from an evolutionary perspective, it could be seen as, well, in order for us to survive as a group, we need to copy each other. And usually we'll tend to copy somebody that we look up to, or even just the vibe of the group. Okay. And they also have what's called the chameleon effect. And so chameleon effect is the same thing pretty much as automatic mimicry. And this is when we tend to pick up like the energy, not the energy, I'm sorry, like the emotions of other people, which is also automatic mimicry, so kind of hands in hand. So this is why, like when you're around people that make you feel good or they make you feel happy, then you also, right, like also feel happy, or people that are naturally happy, or then you tend to mimic that the same thing. If somebody's like sad or depressed, you tend to also mimic that. So this is why it's so important, people, to surround yourself by people, believe it or not, that have like a good feel, that you feel good around them, because believe it or not, if there's like that bad vibe or not a good vibe, then you're also going to be impacted by that. So why it's so important to surround yourself with people that make you feel good, right? So that's important, and that just comes naturally. So that's why I'm hoping that you guys, it's always usually my goal as a teacher is to get that good vibes, unless I'm like complaining about the Z's and the incomplete work, work with me, people. So it just, I want my students to feel good, as well as, you guys coming in with some good energy always helps me out as well. So maybe, and you're in those classes that you're a little like bored, maybe it's a good opportunity to be like, you know what, maybe I should change the vibe a little bit around here, and get it going. So maybe you for sure kind of rubs off on somebody else. So this is really important. Always remind my students as well as myself, how important it is to surround yourself with people that make you feel good, especially when you're not feeling so great and 100%. Um, so yeah, so that's also why, like, if you think of TV sitcoms, this is a good example of this. TV sitcoms, they always put like the voices of like people, not the voices, but the sounds of people laughing. And it was for then other people start laughing too. Okay, so a little thing, a little trick there, that TV does. And then the chameleon effect too is pretty much the same thing, and it just has to do with the emotions, or just even copying certain behaviors. This is also why a lot of times if you hang out with somebody and you even start talking with like them, you start having the same mannerisms. You just even say the same things. So now you know. And it also is linked to mirror neurons. All right. So we talked about conformity, so you don't need to write that, but you definitely need to know about conformity studies. And I guess that's a better word than putting the social norms, is conformity studies. It's really just one study. And that one has to do with the Solomon Asch experiment. So write that down. This is definitely an experiment you have to know. It is ethical. There was nothing unethical about this research or experiment, but it's definitely one that they're always talking about. So Solomon and Ash, and we'll watch like a quick video in class, probably not next class, but the following one, in which you'll get to see the actual participant, and the people that which I totally just had a brain fart of who, um, the Confederates. See, I was finding it in my brain there. Look at my hippocampus trying to work. But basically, the Confederate. So the experiment had like the participant, which was only one person, and then they had a room full of Confederates, which were Confederates are they're part of the experiment, but they pretend to be a participant. So what it was is that they wanted to study conformity. Will people conform even if they know it's wrong, but will they still agree with the wrong answer if they're in a large setting, right? Or in a group setting. So what this experiment was is you had your participant, and then everybody was as a Confederate. They had like 5 or 6 Confederates. And what they did, they put the participant kind of like in the middle. So they strategically placed him kind of in the middle or towards the end so he could hear all these other people talking. And the question was, they would say, okay, look at X and then pick which one of these is the same size, right? And so what they did is they would show a couple slides and then all these Confederates would say the right answer. Now, the reason they did that is because they wanted to build trust in for the participant to trust these Confederates to make sure like that they were smart, right? Like they knew what they were talking about. Because if they would have done it from the beginning, like if you would have said, okay, looking at X, which one is the same? And they would have said C straight from the beginning, the guy would have been like, no, this is something's wrong with these people. But they didn't do that. They build that trust. Now, as time went on, they did it a couple times. Then they started, like, let's say round 6 was they asked him, okay, which one of these is the same as X? And then the first Confederate would be like, the answer is B. And then everybody was like, yeah, B, 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 B. And by the time the participant came, and wait till you see the video, it's very funny. He pops up, his face is like, what? These people are wrong. And I know they're wrong. But then he then agreed with them and said that the answer was C, even though you could tell he was like, this is totally wrong. But he was like, yeah, okay, everybody's saying it, so I'm going to pick the wrong answer, even though I know it's wrong. So that was a Solomon thing. They found out that sure enough, the larger the group, right, they tend to go like conform easier. And I guess I'll write down, actually, we'll just go here where it says likely to conform so that you have an idea of the reasons why it's easier to conform in certain aspects. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, so now we're going to go, hopefully you have these drawings too. So you could even circle, hold on. So just so that you know what that means um, with the study, because you definitely need to know about the little lines and how it worked in the study. And so, when are we most likely to conform? And this is really important because it's a great awareness to have and to understand other people of why they do that, why you do that in certain settings. Okay. So the first one is when we're most likely to conform. And the first one has to do if we are feeling incompetent or insecure. So this is why in like let's say in math, when I was in math class, since I didn't feel really like secure in my math skills, if somebody was like, "Oh yeah, the answer is 26," and I was like, "I think that person knows what they're talking about," I'll just go with it. I'll be like, "Yes, you're right," even though I may think like, "Well, probably it's not correct." But if I don't feel secure in that, you tend to then just conform. Also, next little bullet, there needs to be at least 3 people or more. So that's important because if it's only like you and another person, you tend to then like you'll speak up more into what is your own thoughts. But once there's already two other people, like not including yourself, then it's easier to conform to that. Okay? Another thing is if everyone else is agreeing to the whatever it is they're agreeing with or the behavior, then you also tend to conform. So this is an example of this is if you're in a setting like with a group of friends and they're like, okay, where do you want to go eat? And somebody's like, everybody was kind of like, oh, let's go to Shake Shack, right? Delicious burgers. Um, and then you're like, I really don't like burgers. I rather like Taco Bell or whatever. But if everybody's saying Shake Shack, then even though you don't want to, you tend to lend yourself and be like, oh, okay, you'll conform to, okay, not a big deal. Because if we go against it, right, we're going against that normative social influence of wanting to be part of the social group. Okay. The next one also, we're more likely to conform when the group, like we look up to the group's status or attractiveness. So if we're like hanging out with someone that we believe is like super popular and cool, we tend to then will conform, more likely to conform to those behaviors. Um, and then culture is also going to play a factor in conforming because if your culture is what encourages like respect, um and just especially like with adults, you tend to then conform to whatever the adult or the person is saying, okay, because of your culture that you have to be respectful. All right, and we'll talk a little bit more of that in class and how we see those things in our daily life. Okay, and that is it for conformity. I will pause it and let you, we'll go to the next one because you guys, I love you though.